Most people think that antidepressants just take the edge off your anxiety. What they don't realize is that they can also take the edge of everything else. Your joy, your creativity, your connection to the world, and over time, your sense of even who you are. Andrea was just 19 when she was put on Prozac after a rushed OB-GYN appointment. She had no history of mental illness, just some stress from being in college and not wanting to be an engineer. That one prescription led to 2 decades of psychiatric drugs, multiple failed withdrawals, and a descent into severe neurological damage with brain zaps, restlessness, involuntary movements, and even suicidal thoughts. But this isn't where her story ends, thankfully, because this interview is about the grief of realizing that your life was chemically numbed and the fight to get it back. And so if you've ever questioned what these drugs are really doing to your body and brain, and if you've ever asked, who am I underneath all of this, this is an interview you need to hear. Andrea, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and share your story.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy that you're sharing these type of stories with people.
So let's start here. How did you end up taking psychiatric medications to begin with?
Well, it's several decades ago in like the late 90s when these drugs were kind of first put on the market. And I was in college. I was an engineering major, had a really full college load, and was working, had a lot of friends, but I was also a little bit stressed out. And I also just didn't want to be an engineer. So anyway, I went to a gynecologist and was just mentioning how stressed out I was in school. And she, within, 10-minute, 15-minute appointment, put me on Prozac. I didn't really know that much about these drugs. At that time, I had very much just trusted people. And I was, 19. And so when a doctor suggests something, I just assume it's safe. And I wasn't really informed on any of the side effects. So after I started taking Prozac, I definitely felt more blunted, but I also didn't care as much. So I continued with my major, even though I wasn't happy with it. And so, yeah, that's sort of how it started.
Now, how did things play out for you over the years after that, being on Prozac? What was it something that was helpful? Was it something that was causing harm? Like, how do you see sort of the role of the drug in your life, from that moment sort of moving forward?
Well, it's one of those things that now I have my perspective I have now, so it's almost hard to imagine. But I would say I was definitely much more emotionally blunted. Mm-hmm. I didn't have the full capacity of my emotional range. I think it possibly helped my anxiety, but I would say that is like a very small caveat. But I don't think it improved my life. I think I had just gotten on it and just assumed. I was also told that I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, just like a diabetic needs insulin. Mm-hmm. So I was told this narrative. And so in my mind, I just had to take my medicine, just like a diabetic would have to take their insulin. And little did I know the horrors of it until I started trying to get off of it, which I tried several times.
Yeah. Now, what actually started to happen for you to start questioning this drug? Because, like you said, at the time, you probably just believed what your doctor told you. You were like a diabetic and this was medicine that you needed to take. Where were the chinks in the armor when you started to say, maybe this is not the right thing for me? How did that happen?
So, I got through college. I graduated and moved to Los Angeles. I was an actor at the time. And this was probably in my early to mid 20s, like 23, 24. As an actor, I'm, working with my full range of emotion. And I would really feel like I couldn't go to certain places in my emotional state. And I was like, I think it's my medication. And so at that point, it was the first attempt to get off of Prozac, which I did by myself. And it was pretty bad. I started having pretty severe anxiety, some panic, some pretty bad insomnia. And so again, I started believing the narrative that I have some kind of chemical imbalance and this is just my original state, even though I never felt that way before. It was very intense. And then I was, I believe, put on something called Prozac to help the withdrawals. Again, at the time, I didn't know what they were, but now I do.
Okay. So you get on it. Yeah. So you get on it at 19, and then like, it sounds like 4 years later, you try and come off. But it's like what was the taper like? Was it, I imagine it was a fast taper if you failed at the time, but do you remember how your doctor advised you?
Yeah, I would say that I did it on my own the first time.
Okay.
Because I just wanted to see. And again, this was before there was a lot of information on the internet. And so I probably, it's a little fuzzy because it's about 20 years ago. But yes, it was a pretty fast taper. I think I just went down a couple doses and went off.
Okay. So you end up on Prozac. What happens next for you?
So instantly after I got on Prozac, all the anxiety, all the insomnia completely went away. So I was like, oh, maybe I do have an issue, even though at the time I didn't know it was withdrawals. I try again about 4 years later, having similar issues, just feeling blunted, feeling just off about being on medication. Like it just never resonated with me that I needed to be on something like this dependency. So this time I did with a doctor, I tapered, but I would say it was only about 3 to 4 months. And then I had really severe withdrawals. I had I had brain zaps and some akathisia. And it was really scary because it was way worse than the first time I got off. Because now I was having these like electrical, it feels like your brain is being electrocuted. I was having these uncontrollable movements in my body. Just when I say anxiety, I'm like, it's not even the right word because people think anxiety is something we can live with. This is like sheer terror, like within your body. And this point where I wasn't even functioning, like I couldn't function. Okay. And so being terrified, I went back to my doctor and again, I got the same narrative. You need to be on medication. So she put me on Xanax and Cymbalta.
Wow.
And this was a general practitioner doctor, just a family practice doctor. Okay.
So you have some anxiety at the start because you don't like what you're doing in college. You're having to study to be an engineer. You get put on a medication, but now you're developing things like akathisia and brain zaps, which I imagine are very different from the original state of mind that you were in when you got on the meds. But they're telling you that it's a mental illness and putting you on Xanax as well. Okay.
Exactly. And just to kind of also clarify, when I first went on medication, I was a straight A student. I had a ton of friends and I held a full-time job. I didn't have any depression issues. I was just stressed with my workload. So my original symptoms, I didn't even have really any original symptoms.
Yeah. And the other thing that I want to bring up, because it's sort of sticking in my mind, I speak to people all the time who, like the first couple withdrawals, they're not that bad. Sometimes they don't even feel them. I talked to a mother the other day who said, I came off, essentially nearly cold turkey during both of her pregnancies. When she conceived, she's like, I don't want to be on this. She came off. It was fine. But each time she did it, it got progressively more difficult for her. And
yes.
And I've started to think about those withdrawal symptoms, like the brain zaps and all of that. I mean, this is not a mild thing. I almost think of it as almost like a concussive injury, like you're a football player and every time you come off, it's like your nervous system takes a hit. And then each time you go through it again, you're more likely to develop the severe symptoms and the protracted withdrawal. And so it doesn't surprise me that when you end up coming off Prozac, even though the first one, it didn't sound nice, but the second withdrawal for you sounded a lot worse.
Yes. And actually, it took 4 attempts to finally get off. And it gets exactly what you said. It gets very progressively worse. And the last time I got off, it was, which we'll get into.
Yeah. Well, so let's go on from there. So now you're on Cymbalta and Xanax.
Yes.
How did that work out for you?
So she kept me on Xanax. She was very clear that we can only be on it short term to help me get back on the medication, to help me with, I was sleeping 2 hours a night. I was having severe panic. I couldn't work. I couldn't function. So we did the Xanax for 30 days, I think 30 to 60 days. And then she took me off that. So then I was on Cymbalta at this point. I was on Cymbalta for another 4 years. Again, I was functioning, working fine, but I still it's hard to say because now that I've been off for like almost 4 years now, I feel so much like myself. I never felt like myself. I felt like life wasn't real. And it's so difficult to explain, but I felt like I didn't care about things that I needed to care about. And because I was so used to being medicated as an adult, I didn't know my baseline. I couldn't, it'd been at this point several years that I've been on a medication. You get used to it. So again, I decided to try again when I was 32. So this was, 5 years later. I decided to do a longer taper. I think it was maybe 8 months. And again, what you just said, it was even worse, the protracted withdrawals.
Okay. And so at that stage, had you learned about, gradual tapering? Like, is that how you knew to do the 8-month taper or the bead count? I imagine you were bead counting. You maybe not, but that might have been what you were doing.
I was.
Yeah.
So my taper was easier this time. I remember when I finally got off, I was like, I did it. This feels really good. For about 3 weeks, I was completely medication free. And I felt like my vitality coming back. I felt like this range of emotion. I could feel into my body again. And then about 3 weeks after I had taken the last bit of the Cymbalta, I crashed. And this time it was even worse. And I was devastated because I was so determined to get off these medications because at this point I knew something was off.
Yeah.
I knew something was off. But the withdrawals were so bad. I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't eat. I was at the time working on a movie and I couldn't show up. I couldn't function. And so you get really desperate in this state. You get really desperate. Oh, another thing that would happen is I would cry hysterically for like the same time every day. I would have a crying spell like the same time every day. And then I would have the akathisia that was just so severe. It was so severe in my body. And I can't use terrible is the only word I can't.
Just for the people who might be new listeners to the channel who don't know what akathisia is, could you maybe explain it in a different way, or maybe kind of what that sensation was like so they can follow?
Yeah, so akathisia is this, for me, it's uncontrollable body movements, and it's this severe agitation within your skin. It's almost like your skin is crawling, and it's almost like you just want to break out. And it's also this severe agitation, like the most agitation you've ever felt. And then your body would shake uncontrollably. And then I would have these like writhing movements in my legs and my arms where they just would move on their own. It almost looked like I was possessed.
Yeah. That's awful. Wow.
Yeah. And I wasn't supported by the, doctors because I don't think they knew what to do. So they just kept saying my original symptoms were returning, which is to me, it's like, who has uncontrollable body movements unless you're having seizures?
Yeah.
So again, I just get really desperate. You're just like, want relief.
So, what did you turn to for relief to sort of get yourself out of this horrific state that you found yourself in?
Well, I was terrified, and I also felt like my life was going to fall apart because I was in the middle of producing a film, and I just needed to function in my life. And so I had just fallen back onto being on medication, but this time they put me on something, Effexor.
Okay.
So then I was on Effexor for 7 more years.
And so how long were you in that state of horror for after you came off the Cymbalta before you had to get back on the Effexor to stay functional?
It was about 2 months. I tried for 2 months to just like muscle, like just will myself through this. But my life was falling apart. I couldn't work. I was a single female that supported myself financially. I needed to keep my job. I needed to work. And so to me, this is the only, I didn't have any, that no one really gave me any other options.
And when you got back on the Effexor, did those symptoms go away quickly, or did you have any residual symptoms hanging around?
They did. They all went away.
Okay.
And I'll talk about the last withdrawals, which they did not. They actually got worse.
Yeah. So there's a few like teaching points here, which I just want to mention. One is, at that point, it sounds like you'd been on medications for about 10 years when you came off the Cymbalta. Okay. So 8 months is a fast taper, so when I see people who have been on meds for several years, I mean, we're talking, at least a year, but most people it's up to 2 years when they're doing it. And sometimes even longer. It really depends on how well the brain does in adapting to the removal of the drug. So 8 months would have been fast, but you didn't know any better. I mean, no one was helping you at this time. And so what you described, this sort of lull before you get hit hard with symptoms, is really common. Many people, they may even have that break in symptoms for a couple of months, for 2 months, 3 months. Sometimes they feel okay. And then just like you, they develop global neurological symptoms, the akathisia, the horror-like anxiety state where it never goes away, dizziness, light sensitivity, all sorts of terrible things. And so that's very classic for the start of a protracted withdrawal injury. Now, at least at that stage, the thing you were lucky with, and it sounds like you weren't lucky on your last time, was you were able to arrest it. So for some people, once that akathisia starts, if you reinstate the medications, usually within 3 months, you can sometimes stop that state from sticking around. And that sounds like you were able to do that by replacing it with the Effexor. And that's why quick reinstatement is so important for people. I often talk to people in your state when they're in hell for 2 months and they're going, well, I don't want to lose my progress, but they have akathisia, and I have to tell them, this might be your only shot right now at arresting this, because if you let this go on much longer, I mean, you can get stuck here, and that can be a whole multi-year ordeal to wait for the healing. But so I just wanted to mention that there, because I think your story really captures these difficult decisions and things that can happen. So, but I do want to hear the rest of what you have to share. So let's jump back in.
If we can, it does get worse. So, but then it's a happy ending.
Okay.
So,
okay, good.
So again, I was reinstated with the Effexor. Within, I would say 30 days, I started feeling like myself again, meaning like my drugged self. But I was able to function. I was able to keep a job. I wasn't having the crying spells or the akathisia or the insomnia or the sheer terror and panic. So I had been on Effexor for another about 7 years. And I, at this point, had done a ton of like meditation. I had done therapy. I was just really healthy. And I also at some point wanted to get pregnant. So I was like, I'm going to get off this Effexor. And I know what I know what I'm up against. I know what I'm up against.
Okay.
So I started tapering the Effexor.
Okay. How did that go?
Well, the taper was not terrible. And again, it only took about 10 months. I was on 150 milligrams of Effexor, and I took 10 months. So I, by mid 2019, I was off of Effexor, and I started to feel so alive again. And I was like, oh my God, like I could feel my soul again. I just felt like I was connected to my body, like I mentioned. But this time I felt like, okay, this is who I am. Like I can feel my nervous system. I can cry. okay. And then it got really, really, really bad.
Okay.
Yeah, worse than it did all the other times 10. Mm-hmm. And so about a month in, I started sleeping less and less. So this was, 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night. So I'm a little bit more sensitive, starting to become a little bit more agitated, starting the panic cries in the middle of the day at the same time, starting to not be able to work or function or focus. And then within about 6 weeks to 8 to 2 months, I was in full-blown protracted withdrawals. And this time it was even worse. And I didn't think I was going to make it. It was bad. And so the doctor wanted to put me back on Effexor, which we did. And then I get worse. It got worse. Mm-hmm. So then they tried to put me on Zoloft. It got worse. And then I went to an integrative doctor because I just was like, I need someone that like understands withdrawals, like not these psychiatrists that are just like pro medication. So over those time period, I got put on Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic to help me with my severe insomnia. And when I say severe insomnia, I'm saying I was sleeping 1 to 2 hours a night for months. I was then put on trazodone for sleep, which didn't really help. And then they put me on, and then this is starting to get into 2020, Lexapro and Cymbalta. So at this point, and Xanax. So I was on 5 medications. Mm-hmm. I was getting worse by the day, and I started to become suicidal.
So this is a great time for me to jump in and talk about protracted withdrawal. And so, as you signposted earlier on, you weren't able to stop things with reinstatement on this last go around. And so what happens to some people when they're coming off their medications, if, they'll develop, these severe withdrawal symptoms. And I actually think it's brain harm. And if you've had multiple previous hits, you're more likely to actually develop an injury. And there's a difference between having an injury and being in withdrawal. If you're just in severe withdrawal, if you reinstate the drug, everything goes away and then you kind of go back to your life. But if you've taken multiple hits and then you have another very severe withdrawal, at that point, you've actually done harm. And when people try and get back on the drug now, they'll notice a few things. The first thing is they'll notice that it will not make the symptoms go away because at this point, it's not withdrawal anymore. It's nervous system damage. And sometimes they'll even say that the drugs make them worse. And they'll be really perplexed because they'll say, I tolerated this for, 7 years. Why is this drug making me worse? But what's changed is the drug is now acting on a different nervous system. Before there was stability in the nervous system. Now the nervous system is highly sensitized. It is damaged. And what I see time and time again with many of my patients who are protracted is that when you reintroduce drugs again, it just makes them worse. It flares up their symptoms. Some people will call this kindling, and they'll get worse. And it's such a horrific place to be in because many people will feel, I'm so terrible. I can't sleep. This anxiety is horrific. I'm being pushed to the brink of suicide right now because my whole life is falling apart. And I think we've been brought up to believe that medicine will always have a solution for us. And so you go and see the doctors and you're just like, just give me something. You must have something. There must be something there. And then just like with Andrea, you'll end up on 5 different medications. None of them will work and they'll just make you worse. And you're in, there's no way out. Essentially at this point, what I tell people is you just have to go through it. You need to come off the medications and you just need to look after your body and your health and bunker down and wait for the nervous system to recover. But it's much easier said than done because anyone in Andrea's situation, myself included, if that happened to you, if you didn't know better, you would be reaching for medications left, right, and center. It's so horrific. And so that's what's happening at this point in the story. Thanks for letting me give that aside, Andrea. Please go on with your story.
Well, it's very helpful and it was very accurate to what I went through. So so at this point I had been on 5 different medications, and something interesting that started happening is I started to have dementia-like symptoms. I couldn't complete sentences. I still couldn't sleep after being on 5 medications, with a couple of them are supposed to help me sleep. So at this point, I'm losing hope because I'm not sleeping. I'm losing functioning, cognitive functioning. I repeat the same story to my loved ones 30 times a day, and I don't remember telling them the same story. So at this point, I was like, my brain is broken. It got so bad, I became suicidal for months. This was also during the height of COVID, so I didn't have a lot of resources and help because everyone else was dealing with their own traumas. So I was basically dealing with this alone, which is, and I look back, it's really sad because I didn't have support. And I think from the outside in, it was terrifying for people in my life because, again, I wasn't functioning. I couldn't feed myself. I thought I completely, my brain was at this point completely malfunctioning. So at this point in the story, it gets pretty bad, like the suicidality, and I've never had any of those kind of thoughts before. But at this point, I just didn't know. To me, that is a part of me that actually just wants to take me out of pain because I'm in such severe pain. That's how bad it was. When you don't sleep more than a couple hours a night for almost a year, you start to just lose any kind of cognitive functioning. And again, I'm still dealing with the akathisia. I had lost 15 pounds. I'm really pretty petite, so I was skin and bones at this point. So I just refused to go into a Western hospital at this point. And so I ended up finding a facility that's a holistic facility in Sedona that specializes in withdrawals. At this point, I wasn't working. It was COVID, and I had to basically use my whole life savings to go to this facility in Sedona that actually knew what they were doing. And it saved my life, actually, because I don't think I would have made it.
So tell us more about your recovery, your journey out of this place. How long did it take?
So I went to this facility in Sedona that is very well versed in withdrawals. And they told me that this is harder to get, what I'm going through is harder to get off of than alcohol and heroin addictions. So I think the validation really helped me because at this point I was being gaslit by every single person that I had met with. And so that validation really helped me feel safe, and it gave me a level of trust that they knew what they were doing. And so I had stayed in this inpatient facility for 30 days. And what they did is they basically almost put me to sleep a little bit, but they put me on Remeron, which is a really a sedative medication. And they took me off everything. They said also a couple of the medications I was on were contraindicated as well. So they said it was very dangerous to have possible serotonin syndrome. So they were really unhappy with the medications I was on. They were like, that is a dangerous combination. So they basically got me down that month by putting me on Remeron and then keeping me on a tiny, tiny dose of Cymbalta, a very 15 milligrams, just to have something. So within that month, I got off all those medications. And by the end of the month, I actually started to feel like myself again. I was like, okay, I think I'm going to make it. I think I'm going to get out of this. But I had such severe PTSD from my experience. But I had my cognitive functioning somewhat back, meaning I wasn't repeating myself. I remember I could actually, speak full sentences. So the recovery was then, it was interesting because I actually got COVID really bad as well on top of this. But what happened was the COVID actually helped me sleep because I had such severe sleep issues that the COVID I had for 2 months, basically I was asleep for 16 hours a day. So at that point, I was finally catching up on my sleep, which I think part of it was my sleep deprivation as well. So then I was starting to feel like myself. At that point, I wasn't on the Remeron. I was just on the 15 milligrams of Cymbalta. I started working with, I was working with an integrative. So I was doing a lot of supplements, very carefully supplements kind of added into my routine. Very, very traumatized from my experience. But I was determined to get off. And so the 15 milligrams of Cymbalta, I think I took 18 months to taper off of 15 milligrams of Cymbalta.
Yeah.
And I was fine. I had nothing, thank God. And I've been off for almost 4 years now. Or 3.5 years.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. So bring us forward to today, Andrea. How do you feel on a daily basis now?
I mean, it's like a night and day difference. I cannot believe like how high functioning of a person I am. Like I have really good, I'm also a meditation teacher, and I'm very much devoted to just taking care of my health. And that's always how I've been. But I mean, I'm very well adjusted. I'm a very well adjusted person. I have a lot of friends. I do well in my work. I'm creative. I had to do some EMDR for the PTSD from that experience. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I would say I'm 80% there. I still get migraines. I get migraines, which is something that happened after this injury. Mm-hmm. I started to get migraines, and then I have some really some food sensitivities. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I'm amazing. I have a lot of grief because of how blunted I was most of my life.
Share more about that. Your sort of reflections on and the feelings of grief. Yeah.
Well, I think there was anger too. I think I had anger towards the pharmaceutical industries about the fact that they don't have any longitudinal studies on the long-term effects of antidepressants. I had anger around the fact that a 19-year-old got put on a highly dependent, a drug that causes dependence after a 15-minute appointment with a gynecologist. I had anger for all the times I tried to get off, and every doctor told me I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. So I had to work through that anger, and underneath the anger was a lot of grief. And the grief was just my ability to feel fully human and feeling like I was basically sedated for 2 decades of my life. And when I say sedated, it means I had to drink several coffees a day to stay awake and to be functioning. And I'd sleep 10 to 11 hours a night. And now it's like, I don't really need caffeine. I sleep 8 hours a night. Like, I didn't know, obviously, at the time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Did you get back to a place now where you feel your emotions fully and you feel alive and connected to the world?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it took a while, I think, because I had some PTSD and my nervous system is just very sensitive to adjusting. It's almost like a newborn baby, because I felt everything in my nervous system again before you just don't have the same pings. So there was an adjustment period. There was some working with a therapist, having some EMDR to help me kind of process that trauma. But now, yeah, I mean, I get sad if something's really sad, if I have any kind of loss, and I get excited and, appropriate anger. But it's like, I have a really good sense of emotional control and emotional regulation. And I would say that I'm definitely not a candidate that would be put on any type of medication.
Okay. Wow. Well, Andrea, that is a hell of a story, and I'm so happy that it has a happy ending.
Yeah, me too, because there were moments that I didn't think I was going to make it. And, I look at everything in my life as part of my story and part of who I'm becoming, instead of being a victim to this situation, even though I was a victim. I've learned from it and I transcended it and I'm stronger for it. And now, I have so much more compassion for people and suffering than I think I ever would have, because I know what it feels like to be at the brink of wanting to die. Mm-hmm. And that just opens your heart so much more to what people go through, And so I just think people need better support and need to feel seen and need to feel validated and need to understand the implications of medication, and that there are so many other things to look at besides just trying to fix it with a pill.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I want to ask if, before we wrap up, and if you have any concluding thoughts or a message that you would like to leave for the audience.
Well, I just want to say that there's always hope. Mm-hmm. That if you're going through it right now and you're in withdrawals or you're on a medication, that there are solutions and there is hope. And it's really important that you're gentle with yourself, that you're validating what you're experiencing is very, very real, and work with someone like yourself or someone else that's very highly, highly attuned and specialized to these medications and getting people off safely, because it is so paramount that this is done properly to avoid, the horrendous journey that I went through. And I want to share my story so people don't have to go through what I went through. Yeah. So that they can work with someone like you and get the proper support. Because if I had worked with someone that knew what they were doing, I wouldn't have gone through such a harrowing journey.
Yeah. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for sticking around in the community, even though you are well now, to come back and share your story and show that path for other people and give them hope. Which I know they will have, hearing about how well you're doing now. It's, it means a lot, especially on this channel, because most of the people I talk to are still very sick. And so when we get people who reach out, who have recovered, it means an awful lot to people who are in the thick of it. So thank you for doing that.
No, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to support in any way I can.
Now, if you're someone that's interested in learning how to get safely off these medications, I would recommend these two videos next: The Beginner's Guide to Tapering Psychiatric Medications and How to Find Someone to Help You Taper Off Your Meds.